You've probably heard stories about sweet romances or thrilling tales of revenge. But what if a young woman walked into the life of a powerful tycoon, the very man who once destroyed her family, not to love and not to hate, but to change both of their lives forever? Today's story is an unexpected journey between forgiveness and freedom, between the past and the power to choose. Watch until the end and tell us, if it were you, would you choose revenge or let go? On a March afternoon, as the Texas sky brooded under a gentle spring drizzle, Linda Spencer sat curled up by the small window in her cheap rented room near the university. The 24-year-old woman, with tousled dark brown hair and sleep-deprived, shadowed eyes, was thinking about the birthday cake she couldn't afford to buy for herself. Another birthday passed. No presents, no family by her side, only a stack of bills, part-time shifts at the bookstore, and dreams of a medical career slowly being eroded by a harsh reality. Her phone buzzed a strange number. Linda hesitated, then picked up. "Miss Spencer, this is Victor Brooks. I'd like to meet you. About your tuition fees. And about a proposal I believe you'll find hard to refuse." His voice was deep, steady, with a firmness that didn't allow interruption. Linda froze. Victor Brooks? The name sounded familiar. He was the founder of the state's largest hospital chain, known as a cold millionaire widower for nearly 2 decades. But why would he know about her? Meet me at the Brooks Cafe, 7 p.m. And bring your courage. The call ended before Linda could ask a single question. By 7:05 p.m., she stepped into the elegant cafe on the rooftop of the Brooks Hotel. Old jeans, a thin jacket. Linda stood out, not because of her appearance, but because of how out of place she looked amid the velvet chairs and crystal glasses. At the far end of the room sat an old man, silver-haired, impeccably tailored suit, eyes sharp but fathomless. Linda approached slowly. Her quiet birthday evening, it seemed, was about to begin with an unimaginable story. At exactly 7:10 p.m., Linda sat across from Victor Brooks, the man she had only ever seen in newspaper photos. Around them, soft music played, glasses clinked lightly, and warm yellow lights glowed. But in Linda's heart, there was only one thing: confusion. Victor offered no pleasantries. He simply extended a hand and slid a thin folder toward her. "I've read your file. Scholarship recipient in sophomore year. Mother passed away early. Father left behind debts before he died. Working 2 part-time jobs. GPA 3.92. Planning to apply for residency next year. But now, you've paused your studies to work, haven't you?" Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't know whether to confirm or deny. No one had ever summarized her life so bluntly before. Victor quietly poured tea, his movements precise, almost mechanical. Then he looked up at her. "I'll pay your entire tuition debt, cover your living expenses, and after you graduate, I'll help you get into any hospital you choose. On one condition." Linda clenched her hands beneath the table. "What condition?" "You will become my wife, on paper. A legal marriage lasting at least 1 year. After that, if you choose to leave, I won't stop you." The air seemed to freeze. Linda laughed, not because it was funny, but because she couldn't believe it was real. "I don't understand. Why me? Why marriage? Is this some kind of joke?" Victor didn't smile. He simply looked at her, his eyes seeming to read every crease in her thoughts. "I'm about to turn 72. I have no children, no heirs. Every birthday, people throw parties for me, but no one truly stays afterward. I need someone I can trust, a name on my medical records, someone who will stand beside me when the lights go out." Linda blinked. She still didn't understand. "But, aren't you afraid I'll take advantage of you?" Victor's lips curved slightly, his gaze no longer cold, just tired. "You're the only person who's never asked me for anything. That's why I chose you." A light breeze slipped through the window crack. Outside, the rain still fell. Linda stared into her now cold cup of tea, her heart tangled in knots. Out there, the world raced after money and fame. But she was being asked to give up herself in exchange for freedom in the future. And sometimes, the strangest agreements are the very doors that lead us to the unexpected. 3 days after the meeting at the tea cafe, Linda still hadn't had a full night's sleep. Her hospital shifts passed, as always tense, under-resourced, and leaving no time to breathe. But what wore her down most wasn't the workload. It was the question that had echoed in her mind for days. If all it takes is a signature to save my family, do I have the courage to make that trade? That evening, she left the hospital later than usual. The air was bone-chilling. In the pocket of her coat was a small cupcake, quietly slipped into her locker by Gloria, the elderly nurse, along with a handwritten note, "Happy 26th birthday, you stubborn young doctor. Here's to a year with fewer tears." Linda gave a faint smile, but her eyes burned. Since her father passed, birthdays had become empty days. No gifts, no cake, no greetings from loved ones, just unpaid bills stacked on the dinner table, and a deepening fear in her mother's eyes. Instead of taking the train back to her apartment like usual, Linda called an Uber to the suburban address Victor had scribbled on a piece of paper days before. The driver looked at her in the rearview mirror. "You sure? That neighborhood's for the ultra-wealthy. I've driven some big-shot CEOs there." She nodded silently. Inside her was a storm, a clash of logic, screaming for caution, and a heart anxious for the unknown. Around 9 p.m., the villa gates opened. Towering cypress trees lined the path on both sides, standing silent, as though eavesdropping on the fate of the stranger about to walk in. Soft lights glowed from inside, reflecting off the stone path, damp with dew. The door was opened by a calm, discreet assistant in a gray suit. He led her through a long hallway with crimson carpet, then stopped in front of a large mahogany door. He gave a slight nod and left. Linda took a deep breath. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the doorknob. The living room opened in warm, subdued light. A piano stood beside a large window. Abstract paintings adorned the walls. At the center, a modest dining table with 2 chairs. On it sat a small birthday cake, with a single slender candle flickering in the draught from the glass door. Victor stood with his back to her, gazing at the night sky through the transparent pane. When he heard the door, he spoke without turning around. "You came. Today is your birthday, and mine as well. A coincidence, isn't it? We're nearly 40 years apart, and yet we meet on the day both of us are standing at a crossroads." Linda didn't answer right away. She walked to the table and placed the cupcake she brought beside the birthday cake he had prepared. "I thought, if life is going to be this strange, the least we can do is share a cake," she said, her voice tight with emotion. Victor smiled faintly. For the first time, that smile wasn't entirely cold. They sat across from each other. No champagne, no flowers, no friends. Just 2 people, one trying to forget a youth already lost, the other trying to save a future not yet arrived. After a moment, Linda spoke. "I've thought a lot. Your story, your offer, everything sounds crazy. But looking at it from another angle, I see a terrible loneliness in it, yours. And mine too." She paused, her hand gripping the edge of the tablecloth. "I agree. 1 year. Just 1 year. After that, I have the right to choose again." Victor said nothing. He simply poured tea into 2 delicate Japanese porcelain cups. "The contract will be prepared. There will be no clause requiring you to love me. No obligation for you to stay if, one day, it no longer feels right." They clinked their teacups gently. In that moment, neither of them knew what lay ahead. But in Linda's eyes, for the first time, in a long time, there was a look that wasn't filled with despair. And sometimes, what we need isn't love, but a chance to rewrite the definition of happiness on our own terms. 3 days after that strange birthday evening, Linda moved into the villa as agreed. There was no wedding ceremony, no white dress, no rings, just a contract signed in front of a lawyer, cold and precise, like the life Victor had lived for 68 years. The room assigned to Linda was at the end of the west wing, a place already too quiet within a house full of silence. Its window overlooked a blooming orange grove, white as snow. The room was fully furnished, even included a small bookshelf filled with medical novels, the one thing that made her smile when she first stepped in. Strangely enough, on that first night, Linda couldn't sleep. Not because of worry, but because the space was too peaceful, too unfamiliar, too far removed from the blaring horns and the gusts of wind sneaking through broken glass at her old apartment. She had never lived in a silence deep enough to hear the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Each morning, Linda woke early, made her own coffee, and stepped out onto the veranda to breathe in the fresh air. Victor was also an early riser, but they didn't talk much. He greeted her with a slight nod, always with a book in hand, eyes contemplative, as though he lived in another century. But on the 4th day, While Linda was sitting outside reading medical papers, Victor suddenly spoke. "Do you know what kind of flower grows in the corner of the south garden?" Linda looked up, slightly puzzled. "No, I haven't been over there." Victor nodded, setting his book down. "They're gardenias. They only bloom 1 week each year. But the scent, it's something you remember for life." It was the first time he had shared something unrelated to contracts or rules. That little story, short as it was, made Linda feel she could breathe easier. From that day on, they began to talk more, not like husband and wife, but like two people learning to coexist under one roof, with civility and just enough presence. One night, just after Linda turned off her light to sleep, a sudden rainstorm swept in. Wind howled through the hallway, and the glass windows quivered. She wasn't afraid, just unsettled. Rain here was different from the city. It hit the tiled roof like a sad melody. She threw on a thin robe and headed downstairs to get some warm water. But as she passed the study, she noticed the light was still on. The door was slightly ajar. Linda hesitated, then gently pushed it open. Victor was sitting at his desk, holding an old, yellowing letter in his hands. His eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, now looked heavy, carrying the weight of a winter that had never thawed. He saw her but didn't flinch. He simply said softly, "This is the last letter from my wife. She passed away 20 years ago." Linda stood still, her hand gently clutching the hem of her robe. Victor continued, as if he had never paused. "She said that if one day I no longer had the courage to love again, then at the very least, I should open my heart to being loved, even if only by a stranger." He placed the letter down and looked up at Linda. There was no demand, no expectation. "I don't ask for your pity, even less for your sacrifice. I only hope that while you're here, you won't feel alone." Linda gave a small nod, then quietly poured him a cup of hot tea. They sat there, two strangers, two quiet sorrows, two empty spaces yet to be filled. No more words, just tea, just the sound of rain. But in their hearts, something had begun to take root. Perhaps love isn't always a thunderbolt, but a silent, persistent rain that seeps through long nights, slowly drawing two distant souls closer together without them even realizing it. One afternoon in April, after a quiet birthday gathering at the house had ended and the guests had gone, Linda wandered through the hushed hallways of Victor's villa. The setting sun cast long streaks of light through the glass panes, painting the old wooden floors with a nostalgic glow, like a scene from a silent film. As she passed a deep blue door at the end of the second-floor hallway, she noticed it was slightly ajar. Curious, Linda gently pushed it open. The creaking hinge echoed like a soft sigh. Behind the door was a small gallery room, one no one had ever mentioned. Natural light poured through tall windows. No dust, no cobwebs. The room had been kept meticulously clean, almost reverently. The walls were lined with dozens of oil paintings, portraits, still lifes, landscapes, all carrying the breath of an artist who had once loved life, but whose work also carried a quiet melancholy. Linda was frozen before one portrait in particular, a young woman with a distant gaze, a soft, thin smile, and long black hair brushing her shoulders. The woman's features bore an uncanny resemblance to her own. Beneath the painting was a small engraved line, "Elaine, the last summer." Linda instinctively reached out to touch the frame, as though searching for a memory that didn't belong to her. Then Victor's voice rose behind her, not loud, but startling. "I thought no one would ever walk into this room again." Linda turned around. He stood there in the dappled light of dusk, looking both weary and still. She didn't know what to say. But in his eyes, there was no anger, only a quiet ache. Victor stepped closer to the painting, standing beside her. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "That's Elaine, my wife. The only woman I ever loved, and the one I couldn't hold on to." Linda felt her heart sink. "Was she an artist?" she asked softly. Victor nodded, his voice low, as though whispering to the past. "She wasn't famous, but she painted as if every brushstroke was her last breath. When Elaine died of lung cancer, I lost a piece of my heart. After her funeral, I closed this room, until today." Linda remained silent, her chest filled with an emotion she couldn't name. She suddenly understood why Victor always carried that calm, distant exterior like an old building, beautiful, but closed off to anyone who tried to step too far inside. "Why did you choose me?" she asked, almost a whisper. Victor looked at her for a long moment before letting out a heavy sigh. "Because you remind me of Elaine. Not just in appearance, but in your eyes, in the way you listen, in how you stay calm in the face of sorrow." He hesitated. "But I know you are not Elaine, and I have no right to turn you into someone else just because of my own loneliness." Linda heard the honesty in his voice. She looked at the portrait, then turned back to Victor. "Then why did you bring me into such a strange arrangement? A contract?" she asked. Victor gave a wistful smile. "Because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I let things happen naturally, I would lose that person again. The contract was my way of staying in control, so I wouldn't have to face unexpected pain." Silence fell again, but this time, it wasn't heavy. At last, Linda said softly, "I don't want to replace Elaine. I'm just me. But if you can let go of the past and tear up the contract, I'll stay." Victor turned to her, his eyes, for the first time, filled with hope. "If you say that, then I can begin again." That evening, Victor brought up Elaine's old piano from storage. He cleaned off the dust himself, tuned the strings, and played one of the melodies she used to love. Linda stood at the bottom of the staircase, listening in silence, tears falling without her noticing. In that music, there was no more contract. Only a man slowly learning to love again with a heart that had been broken, but still remembered how to beat when someone touched it in just the right place. That afternoon, a sudden downpour fell over Texas. The sky turned dark, as if hiding something. In a large room filled with wool carpets and the scent of aged mahogany, Meredith walked slowly, each step feeling like she was testing the ground in a world no longer certain. Ever since Mr. George's birthday party, where she had first felt that something was off, Meredith hadn't slept well. Her dreams had become fragmented, filled with images of her late father, a salt and pepper-haired man standing in the shadows, and whispers she couldn't quite make out. That morning, while Mr. George went out to meet his private lawyer, Meredith used the excuse of looking for an old book to enter the study. She didn't know exactly what guided her, only that a deep instinct pressed inside her. You don't know everything yet. In the bottom drawer of the walnut writing desk, she found a locked box, but the key was right there, hidden in a secret compartment on the side. As Meredith slid the key in, her palms were slick with sweat. The box popped open. And then, time seemed to stop. Inside were financial records, copies of contracts, personal letters all linked to her father, Donald Rivera, and another man, Harold Gaines, the late husband of Mr. George. There was a handwritten letter, the paper yellowed, the ink smudged in places where tears had once soaked through. "Donald, you destroyed my family. You didn't just steal the company, you took the woman I loved. You took the honor I protected for 30 years. I swear, one day, I will take everything back from you, in a way you could never imagine." Meredith dropped the letter, her hands trembling. Beneath it was an old voice recording, capturing a heated argument between her father and a younger George. Their exchange was sharp, bitter, full of threats and disdain. Near the bottom of the box, she found something that made her entire world collapse. A prenuptial agreement between her and Mr. George, signed before they had ever even met. In that moment, everything shattered. That night, the rain had not stopped. In the living room, the fire in the hearth blazed brightly, but it could not warm the air thick and suffocating under the weight of truth. Meredith rose from the sofa, a stack of documents in her hand. "Do you want to explain these?" she asked, her eyes locked on Mr. George, the man she had once believed to be a savior, the one who had offered her quiet kindness during her darkest days. Mr. George was silent for a moment. Then he lifted his glass of wine and took a long sip. His eyes carried something like weariness, or perhaps sorrow, something hard to name. "So you found it," he said slowly. "I knew this moment would come." Meredith sat back down, her eyes red but resolute. "Why me? Why did you choose me to play out some twisted act of revenge?" Mr. George gave a sad, defeated smile. "Because you carry the Rivera name. Because you're the only blood left of Donald. Because I once believed the best revenge was to use the flesh and blood of your enemy to reclaim what was taken from you." Meredith swallowed hard. "But I'm not my father." "I know, Mr. George interrupted, his gaze drifting into some far-off memory. "That's what I regret, every single day." Silence fell again. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. "Then, Mr. George continued, his voice almost a whisper, "But then you came not like anyone I'd ever known. Gentle, resilient, and real. You reminded me that I'm still human." Meredith began to cry, not loudly, Just quiet, bitter tears falling like a farewell to a youth manipulated, to a past newly unmasked. "If there's any compassion left in you, let me go," she said softly. "I don't want to carry this hatred for the rest of my life." Mr. George stared into the flames, as if searching for the last ember in his own heart. Finally he nodded. "You will be free. And perhaps I need to learn how to let go too." That morning the Gaines estate was wrapped in an unusual stillness. No clicking heels from the housemaids, no urgent phone calls echoing through Mr. George's study like every other day. Only a soft golden light streaming through the curtains, casting long, warm streaks on the floor. Like the last traces of sunlight from an unfinished dream, Meredith stood quietly at the doorway of his room, a small suitcase in hand. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed the turmoil inside. She had stayed up all night, making a decision, one that would change her life forever. And his, too. When she knocked and entered, he was sitting motionless at the gleaming ebony desk, one hand resting on an old leather notebook, the one he used to write letters never meant to be sent. "You asked for me?" Meredith said, her voice soft but clear. He looked up, his face older and more worn than usual. No longer the stern mask of a man who had swallowed rage for years, but the expression of someone who knew he was losing the last thing that mattered. "Sit down, Meredith." She did, placing her suitcase beside the chair. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Only the slow ticking of the clock filled the silence, each tick a reminder. The time has come. "I no longer want revenge." The words made Meredith look up at him. He met her gaze and didn't look away. "You have every right to be angry with me. The whole world has the right to hate me. But from the moment I met you, everything changed. I started rewriting my will not out of regret, but out of hope." He pushed an envelope toward her, ivory-colored, sealed with red wax. Meredith didn't reach for it. This will could give you everything: assets, ownership of the corporation, or simply a legal apology. But you know something. She took a long breath. "I didn't come here to reclaim justice for my father. And I won't leave with this fortune." Mr. George furrowed his brows, his lips trembling. "You want nothing?" Meredith smiled for the first time after many stormy days. But it was a sad smile. "I used to want everything. Fame, victory, even your approval. But after all of this, all I truly want is to find myself again. Not as Donald Rivera's daughter, not as some heir in your revenge plot, but as Meredith, a free woman." She gently pushed the envelope back toward him. "I leave it all behind. The will, the house, the Gaines name, and all these painful memories. But I'll take one thing with me." Mr. George said nothing. "The hope that we can end a cycle, that the past doesn't have to define the future." She stood, softly, as if afraid she might break something fragile on her way out. "Today is your birthday, isn't it?" He nodded, saying nothing. His eyes brimmed with tears, something he had never allowed anyone to see his entire life. Meredith stepped forward and placed a small box on the table, wrapped simply in brown paper. "I'm not giving you anything extravagant, and I won't leave behind a long birthday wish. Just one thing: live the rest of your life as a man, no longer bound by hatred." She turned to leave, but just as her hand touched the doorknob, Mr. George's voice broke the silence, hoarse, choked, like a lost child. "Meredith, if you walk out that door, I'll have nothing left." Meredith didn't turn around. She paused for a moment, then replied, "But if I stay just because you said that, then I'll have nothing left either." And then she left the estate, not as someone defeated, but as someone who had chosen liberation, letting go of hatred, letting go of power, letting go of the role written for her, to finally return to herself. Years later, Meredith lived in a small coastal town, working as a community lawyer. She founded a non-profit organization that helped women trapped in relationships entangled by power, reputation, or legal contracts. One afternoon, she received a package with no sender. Inside was a handwritten letter from George Gaines, written months before he passed away from heart disease. "I never had children, but if I did, I would have wished for someone like you, strong, principled, and full of compassion. Thank you for teaching me the final lesson of my life, that forgiveness is not about forgetting, but about moving forward."